according to a few reports we're starting to get, it seems like possibly President-elect Donald Trump is potentially signaling some pretty significant changes to the nation's artificial intelligence strategy. So it sounds like at the center of his administration's plans might be a potential dismantling of President Biden's landmark AI executive order, which established safety and privacy standards for AI development. We know for a fact that the incoming administration is shaped in some ways by several key advisors, most notably Elon Musk, who contributed over $100 million to Trump's campaign and has been outspoken about his views on how AI should be developed. We're kind of seeing among the most immediate changes expected is potentially the elimination of the AI Safety Institute that is created under Biden's executive order in order to evaluate advanced AI systems. However, as always, tech companies, think tanks are kind of racing to have their own influence. Some of them are trying to convince Congress to make the institute permanent before Trump takes office in January. And the new administration's AI agenda seems to be aligning around reducing regulatory barriers and promoting AI development that, in their words, is kind of rooted in free speech. So this kind of pushes back against what some Trump allies kind of term, quote unquote, like woke AI with like biased or politically skewed results. And then, of course, there's also going to be what we've heard rumblings about is trade policies that could also impact AI development. Trump has proposed a 10% blanket tariff on U.S. imports and 60% on Chinese products, all of which would affect some of the hardware and products that go into artificial intelligence. And we don't seem to have any real clarity on kind of what would replace this. Would it be just an unfettered set of policies? Would there be additional regulations? We're not sure yet. So, Paul, it kind of seems like we could see some swift, sudden changes to AI policy under the Trump administration. How are you seeing this playing out right now?
Yeah, I think there are breadcrumbs. There's a couple articles that came out over the weekend we'll put into the show notes about this. But the way I kind of think about this is to follow the money is a good way to do it. So while neither campaign really talked about AI much at all, and we talked about this on the show, that my opinion was they didn't know how the public perceived AI, so there were no votes to be won by talking about AI on the campaign trails. But we knew it was going to be fundamental to whatever happened once the administration, whichever one it was going to be, came into office. So when we look at the Trump administration, you can look back over the last year plus of who are the major technology organizations and individuals that backed the campaign. You mentioned Elon, obviously, but Andreessen Horowitz came out a few months back
Right.
and kind of counter to their traditional views, they went all in on Trump. Now, they published in fall 2023, we talked about this on the show, the Techno Optimist Manifesto. So if you want to understand why A16Z and Andreessen Horowitz would back Trump, you could probably go read the Techno Optimist Manifesto, and that will give you a good sense. In essence, they are very, very pro startups. So they want to enable the startup ecosystem to innovate as much as possible with as little regulation as possible. And crypto, those are two or three
Yeah.
big areas: startups, regulation, crypto. So they listed several reasons they believe the Biden administration is stifling startups through overregulation and potentially needless taxation. I guess sort of like the tipping point for them was the Biden administration had proposed a tax on unrealized capital gains,
Mm.
meaning as startups become higher and higher in value, that they wanted to actually tax that increase in valuation before the money was actually realized by anybody. And that was what they claim was the big break for them. Another major player to look into is Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel is the kingmaker for JD Vance. So when Vance was elected to Senate in 2022, it was Thiel who funded that campaign, who basically pushed for him to get into that position. And Thiel, along with David Sachs and some others, are the ones who basically pushed for JD Vance to get the ticket as the vice president. So Vance was put into power through his VC connections. Um, you can go into Peter Thiel's history. He co-founder of PayPal with Elon Musk, Palantir Technologies Founders Fund, so he's a VC as well. He was the first in Silicon Valley to publicly support Trump back in 2016, gave a bunch of money, was very vocal, appeared at the Republican National Convention in 2016, then pushed for Vance to be involved. He's a libertarian, which is someone who advocates for minimal government intervention in individuals' personal and economic lives. So again, get rid of the regulation, let technology do its thing, maximize personal freedoms while minimizing the role of the state. And then there's David Sachs, the All In podcast. I'm sure there's some of our listeners that are also All In podcast listeners. As you would be aware, David Sachs, who was a founding member and chief operating officer of PayPal back with Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all those guys, he was very, very vocal on the All In podcast and got Trump. I think Trump appeared on the All In podcast, if I'm not mistaken. He was also the founder, Sachs was, of Yammer, which he sold to Microsoft in 2012, and he also has a VC firm. And then obviously Elon Musk. So again, if you want to know the general technology agenda and where AI may go, you can look at some of those key players and what they have publicly stated about their beliefs. They're going to have an influence. Now, not all of Silicon Valley was supportive of the Trump campaign and the next Trump administration, but they certainly all lined up over the weekend to congratulate. So you can go and look at Bezos and Bill Gates and Aidan Gomez of Cohere and Jack Clark of Anthropic and Sundar Pichai of Google and Mark Benioff of Salesforce and Greg Brockman of OpenAI. Every single one of them had the congratulatory tweets, and we're looking forward to working with your administration. And again, whether they supported that administration or not, you're going to have to work with them. So at the end of the day, I kind of made my scorecard, right away. I had this scorecard before I started looking into the rest of the stuff. And the losers, in my opinion, climate regulation, done. They're going to do anything in their power to not worry about climate change, and they're certainly not going to care about whether or not advancing AI impacts the climate. So that is a direct loser. The executive order, as you called for, is done. They will can that as soon as possible. So that is a loser. A dark horse loser here is OpenAI and Sam Altman. And the reason for that is Elon Musk's influence. So as we have talked about many times on the show, Elon was a co-founder of OpenAI. He put the first 40 million in, he created the name. He lost a power struggle in 2019 when he tried to roll OpenAI into Tesla. Sam came to power, and Elon has a beef with Sam, and it's very public. And Elon tends to hold grudges. And so there's maybe Sam and Elon kind of come to peace, but if they don't, Elon could probably, with his influence, make Sam and OpenAI's lives miserable if he chooses to. The other side to that is xAI, Elon Musk's startup AI company. You could imagine him getting way more support and power for his own AI startup because he's bought himself some pretty significant influence. And then open source is probably the other and maybe the biggest winner is when you remove regulation, you limit the government's say in the downsides of open source and acceleration of technology. So the EAC movement, that acceleration at all costs, they're a winner too. And so open source probably is a byproduct of that. And that's one of the A16Z plays is they want kind of this freedom to innovate there. The one big variable in all this, and I don't know how this plays out, but the reality is Trump and Elon Musk both have very large egos, very large personalities, and they are both alphas. And how those two get along for 4 years is going to be really interesting because Elon, while he may not hold some official position in the administration, he is certainly going to have influence. And if he starts getting a lot of public credit for things that happen, you almost wonder if that doesn't create some friction. So I have no idea, but it'll be really interesting to watch how that power dynamic plays out and what kind of ends up happening. And again, keep in mind with Elon, he is historically a supporter of Democrats. He's very public about the fact that he voted for Hillary Clinton. It's rumored he voted for Biden. When he took over Twitter in April 2022, he tweeted, "For Twitter to deserve public trust, it must be politically neutral," which effectively means upsetting the far right and the far left equally. So Elon's move to support Trump wasn't assumed all this time. I mean, Elon has tried to remain somewhat independent, um, but there was a shift, and some believe the shift actually occurred when he got snubbed at the electric vehicle event at the White House a couple
Yeah.
years back when he wasn't invited there. And it ended up being because it was like in essence, a union event, and Tesla is not a union shop. But it seems like that may have played a role in him feeling burned by the current administration and shifting his support. But who knows? But, yeah, it's a dynamic situation, and like I said, Mike and I'll keep tabs on it and report the facts to you, again, as an unbiased and objective way as possible, just observing the space. And so those are some of the things that I see early on, but I think we're gonna learn a lot more in the months ahead leading up to the inauguration in January.
Yeah, we'll definitely see how this all plays out in practice, but you mentioned this briefly. It just seems like at the moment, I would not be betting on anything other than EAC movement. The effective accelerationism seems to be the order of the day here.
Yeah, and I think this probably also, I hadn't thought about this one. It probably accelerates the states like California
Mhm.
being way more aggressive. So if you remember when SB 1047, that's right. That's
Yep. Yeah.
when Newsom did not sign that bill. What we said on that episode was that I thought the Biden administration and Nancy Pelosi told them to pump the brakes,
Mhm.
that federal wanted to have a say in this. And Newsom called like all hands in California legislation last week after the election. And so I would not be surprised at all if you don't see states like California race to put some state level legislation in place.
Mm.
I hadn't really thought about that until now, but I could definitely see that being a major play to try and bypass some of the stuff that they know that this administration is going to do too.
Yeah, and while I don't certainly don't expect Silicon Valley to go away anytime soon, you could see some really big moves depending on how regulation at the state level happens of
Yeah.
where some of these companies are built.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Elon's already made that pretty public with his efforts to build more in Texas. But again, like the SB 1047, the key to that legislation is
Yeah.
it doesn't matter if you're in California or not. It's
Yeah.
if you do business in California.
Mm.
And so, California more than any other state can have an impact on the economy with their choices. Um, so yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be fascinating.